Well, welcome back, Team ET, for another fantastic week, and incredible just how quickly the weeks and the months seem to be flying past us. Um, we're heading towards one of the most famous festive seasons, and there's a reason why I highlight that, and you'll know more about that shortly with our conversation. But, we're going to be jumping all over the place today, talking about radio broadcasting, corporate training, acting, military service, even voiceovers, and the famous Santa Claus. So with that, I'm going to introduce our guest for this week, David Doerrier or Doerrier. Which way do you prefer it?
Great question. Right off the bat, Doerrier, it has a German pronunciation.
As a German pronunciation. Okay. So David Doerrier, welcome to the ET Project. Great to have you on the show, and looking forward to our conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Wayne, for inviting me to be a part of your show. I've been following you for quite some time, and now to be a part of it, I'm so excited. Thank you.
You're too kind. We will have some fun today, I'm sure, because you and I come from similar career backgrounds to some extent. And when we first caught up, we were talking about some of those similarities. So I'm sure we'll touch on that. Let's jump in from the deep end. Is there anything in the world at the moment that's got you excited?
Well, yes, I'm excited about the clients that I have been working with for quite some time, and to see them grow in their speaking skills. I've had a number of folks come to me with very high anxiety when it comes to public speaking. They all had a speaking engagement that was coming up. We were able to craft an engaging presentation. They've all been able to get up in front of an audience and present that presentation, and then come back to me and say, hey, this is working. So that's what I'm most excited about.
Fantastic. And we're going to jump into your business a little bit later, but for the listeners, your business is all about presentation skills and being able to speak in public. So we will definitely come back to that. You've lived a very exciting life as well as career, to say the least. Very diverse, perhaps is the right way of saying it. And I'd love to unpack some of that. If I start with where you grew up, I believe it was on Long Island. Now, you're American. Most of our listeners are not American. So let's start with the question of what and where is Long Island?
Oh, great question. Well, Long Island is part of New York. New York is a very diverse state. We'll get to the military in a little bit, but when I was traveling and I would tell people that I was from New York, people automatically would think of New York City.
Yeah.
But New York is very diverse. New York City, certainly. Long Island has its own characteristics. And then you also have upstate New York, which is like a whole new world in itself. But Long Island, New York, it's probably 100 miles in length, and I'm not sure about the width of it, but I was born, raised, and conceived there, close to the water, spent a lot of time on the Great South Bay, the Fire Island beaches, and so on. It was a great upbringing.
The only thing, David, that I know about Long Island is the Hamptons. And the only reason I know about the Hamptons is because of the property shows and the wealthy properties that I see on TV. Is that where you grew up?
No, not in the Hamptons. Certainly, the way you described it is certainly accurate. There's a lot in between. The Hamptons would be out getting close to the end of Long Island. Montauk Point is the very end of Long Island. So you're out in that area. Riverhead is out in that area. But I was probably in about the middle part, Babylon, Long Island, New York, which is, there are two counties in Long Island, Nassau County, which is closer to the city, and then Suffolk County outside of further out. So yes, I would say yes. So yes, the Hamptons are further out on Long Island.
Okay. So what do you do as a child, as a teenager growing up on Long Island? How do you occupy yourself?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, I'm the oldest of 5 kids, so we were all very close in age. Part of my growing up was just about killing each other as kids in the house. But whenever we would go as a family to other people's homes, we would be the nicest kids and please and thank you. And my mother would get compliments about it. Boy, your kids are so well behaved. But as soon as we got home, we were killing each other. And I would say that growing up, we were close to the Great South Bay. We always had a boat. We were out water skiing and clamming and catching crabs and fishing and taking the boat out and water skiing and going to Fire Island beaches and so on. I guess, and the other big thing that I did as a kid was listening to radio. And that was my inspiration to finally later, we'll get to that, in ending up in radio broadcasting.
Okay, fascinating. How often would you go across to the New York mainland, like into the main metropolitan city area?
You know, it's interesting, and that living so close to New York City and really not exploring it as much as I should have explored it, because one of the nice things about New York that many people may know is that the transportation, trains and subways and so on, is right there. Matter of fact, my high school right across the street was the train station, the Long Island Railroad. But those infrequent times that I would go to New York City, that excitement of getting onto the train, the excitement of getting into the city and seeing the tall buildings and the smells, the different restaurants and the activity. Oh, there was just nothing like it.
Yeah, incredible. Now, you're not living on Long Island at the moment, so you've moved around throughout your career. Maybe just give us a short background on what you've been doing in your career, if you don't mind.
So as far as the travels, so after high school, I went into the military. I joined the Air Force, and that took me originally to San Antonio, Texas, where I did my basic training, and also my schooling was in Texas. And then my first assignment was sort of kind of in your neck of the woods, getting close to you. I went to Guam, and I was there for 15 months. After Guam, I spent time in Korea for about a year and a half. After Korea, Homestead, Florida, which is down in the very south of Miami in Florida. Went back to Guam for 3 years, spent some time traveling to the Philippines, to Japan, Okinawa, Hawaii, Australia. Just I'm very grateful for all of the places that I've been able to experience, the different people that I've been able to meet. It's really given me a great education, being able to meet all of these other cultures. And then eventually coming back to the States, I left active duty after 10 years, went into the reserves, and currently I'm living here in Atlanta, Georgia. And in the reserves, I spent some time in Saudi Arabia, Germany, Turkey. I love Turkey. I learned so much about Turkey and some other states here. So hopefully I was able to do that in a short period of time.
Yeah, excellent. I'm curious, and I always ask this question, so my listeners probably get a little bit tired of it, but I'm curious, as you were growing up, was there anything that suggested you would end up doing what you just explained? In this case, moving into the military, having the opportunity to work in the Air Force, I believe, and travel around the world as you did. Was there any sort of indication as a child that this was the path you would take?
Wow, that's a great question. I would say my initial response would be no. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I did have that fascination with radio. I would listen to radio all of the time. I'd go to sleep at night with a transistor radio underneath my pillow. I tried to get into radio when I was in my senior year in high school. My English class, we focused on media, and that was probably the best grade I ever received in any class, because I was so interested in radio and television and so on. And I went down to the local radio station and tried to get into the Columbia School of Broadcasting. I had to take a test, and I didn't score high enough on the test. So I guess the only thing that I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew I did not want to go to college. I was not very academically inclined. I like to work. I always worked. I worked for my in my father's business. I worked for other businesses. So what I wanted to do, the military was because I ended up in the military because I got fired sort of from a job, and then I was holding up a wall in a bar. I was spending a lot of time in a bar after I graduated from high school, and I said, I got to do something. And I originally went down and talked to the Coast Guard, and they said, well, we got a 1.5 year waiting list. And I didn't want to go in the Navy. So I said, let me try the Air Force. Let me say this. I loved planes. I had a fascination with watching planes, and the smell of the jet fuel was fascinating to me. So I guess there you go. There's the answer. I had a fascination with planes.
Fantastic. I'm pleased I asked that question. I'm smiling to myself because I mentioned earlier that we have a largely similar background in terms of education and learning and development in particular, and instructional design. And I also had no interest in academic careers. And as you've just described, we sort of ended up in the same pathway, getting back into learning and development. So we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. But okay, fascinating. And when you found yourself in the Air Force, what was it you were actually doing?
I was my job title was air transportation specialist, basically loading, downloading anything and everything you can think of that would fit on a military or civilian cargo or passenger aircraft. Everything from every type of cargo, from small boxes to large tanks, to people, baggage, food, pillows, blankets. I loved it. It was the job that I signed up for. Many people went into the service and took potluck, but I had went through the recruiter and said, this is the job I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a mechanic, but I wanted to work around aircraft. So the weight and balance of the aircraft, loading the aircraft, downloading all of the cargo. I loved that job. I did it for a total of 28 years, 10 years active duty, and then 18 years in the reserves.
Incredible. How long have you been in Atlanta?
I've been here since 1995.
Wow. So what's that, coming up 30 years?
It's hard to believe. 30 years. It's hard to believe that it's been that long. And it was the military, it was the reserves that brought me here in 1995.
Yeah, it's a great place. The corporate world that I came out of, our American headquarters was in Atlanta. And our seed campus that we had for the company was in Alpharetta, where I believe you are, right? So
yes. And then you also mentioned that you had that the company has a location right next to the Atlanta Braves stadium, correct?
Correct. Yes. So they have a brand new elevator test tower, which I believe is the highest building in the area. So it stands out. Yeah.
Well, after we first talk and you mentioned that, I have passed that area several times, and now I take note of that and say, hey, you know what that tower is? So now I see that tower. Right.
Well, it's interesting. We have a couple of common friends that follow you that I worked with. So we have a let's say a second level of relationship already, that even though we didn't know each other. So the reason I asked about how long you've been in Atlanta was because there's a topic that probably piqued a lot of curiosity with people when I first introduced it to this episode, which was the role that you play as the Jolly Old St.Nick, or Santa Claus, as most people probably know it. And you've been doing that for 30 odd years. So I need to ask some questions around that just to satisfy my own curiosity, but I'm sure a lot of listeners also. So how did you get into this role? Like what's the story behind the role that you play here?
Well, it really came from desperation because I needed money. I was living in California at the time. I was working full-time radio,
Mm.
And radio, yes, I found some of the fame and fortune, or I found some of the fame, but none of the fortune. So I needed to find a part-time job. I
Right.
was doing some community theater at the time. This was back in the late 80s
Mm.
when I started doing this. And I looked through the newspaper looking for a part-time job. And I found that there was an agency in Oakland, California that was looking for Santas. Christmas had always been a very special time in my family.
Right.
There were there's many things about my family that created anxiety and so on, but it was always Christmas morning where we all came together. So I applied for the job. Within a week or so, I was in their school at this agency, their Santa school, and I left
Mm.
there. At that time, I did not have the beard. For out of the 30 years that I've been a Santa, 27 of those years, I did not have the beard. I had the strap-on beard and the glue-on mustache and the wig and so on and so forth. And I left that training with a box that had a Santa suit in a box. And I started doing shopping malls, and I really got well, the first time I put on the suit, it was amazing that I took on that character. I had acting experience, so I knew a little bit about being a character and developing a character and so on, and had the basics of that. And it was just magical. It was I felt like the Pied Piper in that suit. Wearing a Santa suit is like wearing a magnet. It's just unbelievable.
For kids in particular, I'm guessing.
Yeah, kids, women, it's crazy. I can't if I got a nickel for every time I had it got pinched, I'd be a rich man.
And you mentioned you take on the character. I mean, this was something I was curious about. How much do you actually get into character? Like, as you play this role, do you need to be clued up on everything that we learn about Santa and about the North Pole and about the elves and the
Mm.
whole Christmas um, storyline?
Yeah, that's a great question. If I would say certainly some basic knowledge, but
Right.
I think that a lot of it comes from the heart.
Mm.
What I find that I do is when I'm with children, my focus is right on them. Normally I'll be seated and the children will be standing in front of me, and I'm talking directly to them. I'm looking directly at them.
Yep.
There are many times that I don't understand what they say, especially when they're sitting on my knee and
Yes.
there's a lot of activity going on around me, a lot of noise that's going on around me. The child is mumbling, maybe looking away from me. I'll ask a question,
Yep.
especially what do you want for Christmas? And then they'll say something, but I never respond, what, speak up. I'll never say that. Wow, that's exciting. Wow, that'll be great. So always just focused on the kid. And many times the parent will come up to me, well, what did they ask for Christmas? I don't know. I don't know what they said.
Yeah.
But it's always positive, no matter what they're wearing, no matter how dirty their clothes are or how fancy their clothes are. You look great. And Santa has known them ever since they were born. So it's
Absolutely.
great to see you again, even adults. It's great to see you again. Wow, you look great. I love the outfit you're wearing. So it's a very positive experience. So
Mm.
when it comes to the questions, where's Mrs. Claus? How's Rudolph? A lot of it is impromptu
Yeah.
speaking skills and my Toastmasters experience of impromptu speaking certainly comes into play.
Mm. Mm. Which leads us nicely into the next stage of what I was going to ask about. But is there any memorable time before we jump away from this? Is there any memorable moment playing this role as Santa Claus that really sticks in your mind?
Well, there are so many of the special children, the special families
Mm.
to see. One of the things that I observe is that, and my wife and I, we don't have children, but it's to observe the mother and father watching their child interacting with Santa, And I can only imagine that it's bringing those parents back to when they were with Santa, or when their parents were observing them with Santa and interacting with Santa. And that child, when they truly believe,
Yep.
it is, you can feel it, you can sense it, you can see it. It's magical, that interaction between Santa and that child when they are fully engaged and Santa is fully engaged with them.
I can just imagine if we had the time, we would unpack this so much more, but I can imagine you will have so many stories about the whole range of children that you engage with, and probably the parents as well. So,
I'll tell you one quick story.
sure.
I have some kind of sort of standard um, lines that I use when I'm finishing up with the child,
Mm,
and roughly it's, mind your folks, do your homework, do your chores, eat all your vegetables. I won't use all of them at one time, but I would
right.
use one of those, and sometimes depending on the interaction will determine which one of those lines I will use.
Yeah.
But I have found the one line of eat all your or what's your favorite vegetable, and I'll do this with children. I'll say, remember to eat all your vegetables. And then a little one that's around 3 or 4, maximum 5-ish, I will always ask, what's your favorite vegetable? And 8 times out of 10, they'll come back and say a fruit. And I'll always say, wow, that's my favorite vegetable too. And sometimes the other child that's older might say, well, that's not a vegetable. Or the parent will say, that's not a vegetable. I don't even listen to that. I acknowledge that, say, wow, that's my favorite. Because usually they'll say strawberries. And I'll say, well, that's my favorite vegetable too. Again, it's that encouragement, that engagement with them, because I don't want to say, oh, that's not a vegetable. Give me
Mm,
a vegetable. I don't want to correct them. I don't want to do that.
sure, sure. They get enough of that during the rest of the year, I imagine. So,
Exactly. So I'll share that one thing with you.
very nice. We could chat about this for a long time. What came first in your career? Was it the public speaking? And I know you've been in acting for a long time, and radio, etc. So was it public speaking, or was it in the corporate world with training?
Well, it was with the military, with the training.
Right,
That's what,
military.
so during my 10 years active duty, I may have been doing some mentoring,
Mm,
nothing formal training at that time. Then I ended up in the reserves because I had been active duty in the same career field. I started doing some mentoring and some informal training in my unit in
right.
Texas. And then my first sergeant came to me in 95 and said, there's an opportunity to move to Marietta, Georgia to be an instructor for reservists that were coming into this career field of air transportation. So
Mm,
prior to that, I had my radio broadcasting. I had done that for 12 years. And I had the stage acting in community theater, which I had
mm,
done for roughly 5 or 6 years at that point.
right.
And then so this was my first exposure to learning the craft of training, of designing training, working with a computer on a daily basis and in
Mm,
the mid 90s, and training people, being up in front of people and learning the craft of training. So training came first.
okay. And it evolved, I guess, into somewhat of a passion, because it's sort of an offshoot of what you now do with your presentation and your facilitation, etc. I know you have a book or an ebook about
Mm.
how adults learn principles of engagement. Perfect. Yeah. And we're going to go into those principles a little bit as we go through and look at the presentation skills. But when we first connected, we were talking about adult learning,
Mm.
and we spoke about Malcolm Knowles. For those in the States in particular, may have heard the name Malcolm Knowles, very tightly associated with adult learning. Um, when I look at your principles, they're probably a little bit different, but there's some similarities. So, was there a connection between his approach and what you ended up doing?
Oh, yes. That they, whether you look at Malcolm Knowles' 5 principles of adult learning, or you look at my 8 principles of engagement, they may be worded a little bit differently, but they both have the same objective, and that is to create engagement with your audience. The more engagement that you have with your audience, the more that your message is going to resonate, it's going to stick, it's going to be relevant, because the more relevant it is, the more it resonates with your audience, the more it's going to stick with them, the more you challenge your audience. So whether you look at Malcolm Knowles, and the reason that I kind of transition into these 8 is that Malcolm Knowles to me was good stuff, but it read very technical to me, and I had a very difficult time relating those 5 to my audience.
Right.
That's why I adjusted to these 8.
And I guess when you talk about engagement and you talk about very, very heavily influenced by your ability to tell story, particularly when you're presenting or you're facilitating. How much do you go into the storytelling element?
Oh, yes. So definitely a big part of it. That's one of out of the top 3 things that I mentioned to folks. They'll ask, well, what are the top 3 things that you gotta remember whenever you're presenting to an audience? One is you've got to you got to know who your audience is.
Yeah.
Number 2 is incorporate stories, and number 3 is have a compelling conclusion. So stories are extremely important, very engaging, but they have to be told in a certain way. It's more than saying that, well, yesterday I went to the store. Okay, but you got to give us a little bit more. You got to put some color in there and create. It's also about creating that emotion, that impact with your audience. The impact comes from stories, analogies, examples, those types of things. Yes, stories, very important.
Very important. Great. We're going to go deeper into that very soon, but there's an area that I want to touch on because it fascinates me in particular, but I'm sure our listeners might get a kick out of it as well. You also, as part of your business, you do e-learning voiceover. And as I explained when we first connected, I've been working in this game for a long time, and we've engaged so many people who do the voiceover, but I never connected it as a separate business. And here we are talking now, and I'm talking to somebody who does e-learning voiceover. How did you get into that?
Great question. After leaving, I worked for the Air Force for several years as an instructional designer and as an instructor, and then eventually left the reserves, or left that job with the military, and then started working for a civilian organization where we were creating customized training for a number of corporations here in the Atlanta area. We were creating, this was in early 2000, we were creating e-learning. And they said, well, we need a voice for this e-learning that we're creating, and we're bringing in someone from the outside to do it. Right. And I said, well, I used to do radio. I had 12 years of radio in my hip pocket at that point. I wasn't working radio at this time. I said, I worked radio in the past. Give me a shot. So I did an audition for the company, and they said, hey, that sounds great. And so now, not only was I able to do the voiceover and learn now the craft of voicing e-learning, they were saving money because I was already on salary.
Right.
So that's how that started, was internal. And then how it became an external business. I had a buddy that I knew from my military job in Marietta, who left that job and went to work for GE in their training department, and said that we're creating training. We have a company out of India that is developing this training, but we need a voice here in the United States. Would you be willing to be the voice? And I said, sure. So I auditioned for that job. I got the job, started voicing the stuff for GE's locomotives and generators and that stuff. And this India-based company said, hey, we'd love to use your voice for other stuff like Caterpillar, IBM, Lennox air conditioners, and some other stuff. And I said, sure. And so that's how my elearningvoiceover.com business started.
Wonderful. It's a great story, and as I said at the very beginning, your career is so diverse. You've touched on so many different areas. Santa Claus, of course, is way out in left field, um, but e-learning voiceover, yeah, who would have thought? What I'm wondering about is, as I listen to this, is you mentioned that you were involved or are involved in Toastmasters, and I'm just wondering, how big of an influence has Toastmasters had on you with your current business, but also with the different things you've done in your career?
Yeah. Toastmasters has been an enormous benefit to me in my business. I originally was associated with Toastmasters about 30 years ago. I don't remember exactly what happened to get me there, but I know that I started in Toastmasters around the same time I started training with the military. And I guess I was looking for a way to improve my speaking skills. And so that's how I found Toastmasters originally. I have stayed with them on and off, even during the time that I was with the reserves and was in Turkey. They had a Toastmasters club there. When I was in Saudi Arabia, they had a Toastmasters club there. Germany, Toastmasters club. So I've been visiting those clubs. But the biggest thing that I take away from Toastmasters, number one, the community that is there. Everybody that's involved all want the same thing. They're all wanting to get better. Not only at speaking, but Toastmasters also helps with leadership skills as well, because of all the different leadership roles that are within each club. And then also when you get into the district level and so on. But the thing is that the reason that I stay there is because it challenges me. It challenges me to try different things, experiment with different ways of presenting. Because one of the areas that I struggle with is humor, is incorporating humor and stories. I've been a trainer for so long that when I get up and speak, many times I present as a trainer, but I need to learn how to present better as a presenter or storyteller or humorist. And in Toastmasters, that's where I can experiment and do that.
Yeah, yeah, it's a wonderful organization. There's no doubt. You mentioned impromptu speaking. Do you also do that? Practice that at Toastmasters?
Oh, yes. They have a portion of every meeting that's called table topics, which is impromptu speaking or speak by the seat of your pants.
Yes.
Where you have a table topics master who is in charge of coming up with questions. The question could be anything. I use a lot this all of these different cards here, and I'll just pick some of them randomly. And the question is, let's see. Well, I'll go with the one I just picked. Is justice or forgiveness more important? So the participant has no idea what the question will be, and now they have to speak for a minimum of 1 minute and a maximum of 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Toastmasters also has a lot of competitions, and one of the competitions is an impromptu competition, and I love impromptu speaking.
Yeah, I do too. That's why I was fascinated when I saw it. Of course, impromptu, I find, and correct me if you feel differently, but I find impromptu speaking is a great preparation tool for debating. And yeah, debating is something that I really feel passionate about. And one of the ways I used to practice it was with impromptu speaking. And that question that you just picked was a classic type of question for debating.
Yeah. Yeah, and I belong to a site where I'm a tutor on this site, and I get folks will be looking for, because I put in that I am a tutor for public speaking, and sometimes folks will reach out looking for a debate coach. And I'm not a debate coach. I've never debated, but what I would, just like what you said, understanding basic presentation skills, understanding stage presence, understanding vocal variety, eye contact, building confidence, impromptu speaking skills, to me, would be at the foundation of being a good debater.
Yep.
I find that a lot of people don't understand that. They say, oh no, we need a debate coach. Well, think about having a presentation coach as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so many strange you can go down in that regard, but you also mentioned evaluation contests. Now, what is that within Toastmasters?
Yes, that's a great question. So an evaluation contest would be, you would have a number of people that would be competing. So for example, I would be one of the competitors as an evaluation. There may be 4 or 5 other competitors. We all would view one speaker. This speaker would be called a target speaker. Every prepared speech in Toastmasters is evaluated. Every Toastmasters meeting will have people that have signed up to give a prepared speech. You will have the impromptu speaking, and then at the end you will have an evaluator who will evaluate that prepared speaker. But in this case, when the competition, now we have 4 or 5 evaluators that will be evaluating one speaker. So now that speaker goes up, they do their presentation for 5 to 7 minutes.
Right.
They are timed. All of those evaluators will now go to a separate room. We all will have 2 minutes to come up with our evaluation. We all then, in a separate room outside of the stage area, we then put our pens down. No, maybe, I don't know, 5 minutes maybe to do our evaluation, put our pens down. Someone is observing us. And then one at a time, each of us will go in and give our evaluation. And then we, as evaluators, are evaluated by judges.
Right.
And our evaluation is also timed 2 to 3 minutes. Then the best evaluator will win the contest.
It's a fascinating approach. I mean, it's like a train the trainer approach for speaking. It's a very interesting concept. Let's move into your business. So you have a business, you do a lot of presentation skills. What's the business itself called?
The business is called presentyourwaytosuccess.com.
Very good. And that's essentially what your business is about. It's all about learning how to present, right?
Right.
So would you like to expand on what you do there?
Oh, sure. Great question. So it's working with subject matter experts. My business is, for the most part, agnostic, that everybody is, no matter what the subject is, that at the core, the objective is working with these subject matter experts to help them craft a message that is going to be engaging and is going to stick with their audience. Because my tagline, talking and telling, ain't training or selling. So many people will say, I don't need a presentation skills coach because I never get nervous when I speak in front of an audience. Well, that's great that you never get nervous, but are you connecting with your audience? Are you just getting up there and just talking? I have evaluated a number of people outside of Toastmasters in networking groups, and many of these business owners, and I don't want to fault them because they just don't know. They feel they've seen everybody else do the same thing. Just get up and just start talking. Me. And then they talk to us as if we are experts in that field. There needs to be an engaging opening. There needs to be transitions. There needs to be stories. You've got to know your audience, and then there needs to be some sort of compelling conclusion to wrap the whole thing up. So getting up and not being nervous, great, but have you crafted a message that's going to stick with your audience?
Which
that's
is a
what I
great
do.
segue in. Sorry to cut you off, David, please.
No. And that's basically what I do, is help them take their existing content, massage it, and then spit something out that is going to be engaging to their audience.
Yeah. Which is so true. I mean, we all think we're fantastic at everything, right? And it's only until somebody comes along and has the ability or the gumption to actually point out that, hey, maybe you could do this a little bit better, that we really sit up and take notice, hopefully.
Right.
It's a great segue, however, into your 7 principles or your eight principles. Would you like to run through them? You mentioned one of them in what you just said, in the sense of primacy versus recency. So maybe we could start at that point in the axis. Is that where you normally start, or you start with complexity?
Well, you know, all of them have equal value. And all of them can be combined into one. For example, an opening, you mentioned the primacy and recency. So here we're talking about primacy meaning firsts and recency meaning lasts, or the most recent thing. That as humans, we remember impactful firsts. For example, Wayne, do you remember your first car?
Absolutely, a Cortina, a white Cortina.
White Cortina. What about your third car?
Not so much.
Not so much. It might take a little thinking of that. So that's an example of that, having that first car, very impactful. For me, it was an Oldsmobile Delta 88 was my first car. And then and how that relates to speaking or presentations or training is the opening has to be impactful enough to get your audience to be engaged, to which now brings me into another one of the principles, the principle of ownership, to get your audience to take ownership in listening. Ah, yes, now I see the value. I understand that this is your audience member saying that they're taking ownership to listen, to want to learn, to want to be engaged, to understand what are the objectives, where are we going, what's the destination. So creating an impelling opening. And then also a principle of recency, you've got to bring it all together at the end to give them a compelling conclusion, maybe a call to action of some sort, or just next steps that's going to get them motivated to take those next steps. So right there is 2 of them, the primacy and recency being one of those 8. And then the next one is the principle of ownership, where your audience now is motivated enough to say, yes, I want to learn. Yes, I see the value.
Yeah, and we probably don't have the time to go in detail to all of them, unfortunately, because it is quite an interesting diagram and theory that you've put together. I see that you have highlighted in your graphic of this theory complexity, and you talk about the principle of complexity. Maybe you could just unpack that a little bit for us, please.
Sure. Yeah, this was the one that I found when I was training in corporate, when I was working with folks that were transitioning from high-tech jobs into a training or facilitator position. They struggle with a lot of these, all of these, but this was the big one. And principle of complexity is all about understanding your audience and meeting your audience where they are. So let me ask you, Wayne, have you ever been a participant in a training session, or have you ever been a participant in a training session where the presenter immediately started talking over your head?
Wow,
starting to freeze up a little bit.
Probably the majority of times.
Yes. So there's an example, and if I use a swimming pool analogy here, is that's where that instructor or presenter dove straight into the deep end of the pool and then dragged all of the participants with them, and everybody's drowning with all of this high-tech knowledge.
Right.
So the principle of complexity is understanding where is your audience in the pool, and then meeting your audience where they're at, and then slowly bringing the audience with you depending on what the objectives are, towards the deep end of the pool. So
Right.
principle of complexity, understanding your audience, meeting them where they're at, and then slowly bringing them with you to meet your objectives.
And of course, to be able to do that as the facilitator, as the presenter, you need to do some preparation, I would imagine.
Right.
And therefore,
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier that you need to understand your audience as one of the top three. The preparation allows you to be able to do that. And then you can, of course, start to leverage that preparation as you work through the event, right?
Yeah.
That would be how I would interpret.
Exactly. So there's a number of ways. Great question. There's a number of ways that you can understand your audience. Certainly, you can do it beforehand. Now, if you know all of these people, certainly that's one way of, if you're training within your organization, you understand who they are and what level of understanding they currently have of the subject. But if you don't know, then maybe the person who has organized this event, you can certainly ask them some questions. But you can also do this at the event, at the beginning of the event, by asking some polling questions from the stage.
Absolutely.
And how many people here are afraid to speak in public? How many people here have made presentations before? How many people here have done this or X or whatever the question happens to be? Now, right there, I'm showing an example of doing several things. Number one, many people that I work with all say the same thing. Well, not all of them, but many of them say that, when I first get on the stage or when I first get in front of a group of people, that's when I'm most nervous. But after a while, I kind of work through it. How can I work through that? Well, one way is you can ask a question at the beginning. Now you're kind of giving yourself some time to get centered on the stage, feel comfortable. Now it's on your audience a little bit more. The focus isn't on you. You can have a couple of follow-up questions. Now, certainly the questions need to be relevant to what your topic is, but it's not only a way for you to work through that nervousness, but it's also a way to assess your audience. Who do I have here? How many people here get nervous before you speak? And if nobody raises their hand, well, half of them are lying. The other half, may not get nervous. So now it's kind of giving me an example of what people's current experience is with the topic.
Yeah, it's so true, David. I mean, there's so many dynamics at play just in that simple approach of asking questions. You create the engagement, you break the ice, you do a whole host of different things with such a simple approach. So, yes, I like that very much. We're very tight on time, so unfortunately we won't go through every one of the principles. If you were to summarize your approach with your clients, is there some elevator pitch you have about the approach you have?
That's a great question. So, while my approach with everybody is customized to their needs, but I think that the most important part when it comes to thinking about writing a speech, well, there's a couple of things. First of all, is understanding that, number one, your audience wants you to be successful. There's usually only one person in that room that feels that the speech or presentation or training or whatever it happens to be is going to fail. Wayne, can you tell me who that one person might be?
Probably me or the presenter.
Exactly. Everybody else in that room wants you to be successful. We do a really good job of tearing ourselves apart. Now, I have to say that I was not born with the gift of gab. I was a very shy, pimply little kid growing up on Long Island. I ended up in this career field. Higher powers had some plan for me. I ended up in radio. It was a fluke that I ended up in radio. I ended up in theater. That was a fluke. I ended up as being a Santa Claus. That was a fluke. I just ended up in that. So it all just kind of happened. But in each case, I found that I loved working in radio. I was good in radio. I was good in theater. I was comfortable on the stage. I had to work through a lot of anxieties. I had to work through a lot of voices in my head that were telling me I'm no good, but I kept pushing forward. There was a lot that I had to learn about training. There was a lot of times that I failed, but all of those things have contributed to because I experienced them. So I know what my client is going through. So number one, your audience wants you to be successful. Number two, taking instructional design techniques, using those same techniques and applying them to speech writing or training. And you always start with the conclusion. Is where are we going? You can't, many people are, even in training, they're starting from the beginning. I got to write training. So they start from the very beginning. Well, what's the objective? Where are you headed? What should people understand? What should they walk away with? And that's the part that I love the most, is the needs analysis piece, to dig and dig and dig for the true objective, not only of the training, but of the presentation.
You've opened so many cans of worms there. I'd love to spend at least another 5 hours on this discussion, because it's so reminiscent of my education here with instructional design and working in L&D. Unfortunately, we don't have that time. Where can people go and connect with you if they like what they've heard so far and they'd like to learn more?
That's a great question. So one place would be my website, presentyourwaytosuccess.com, or if you get the correct spelling of my name, you will find me on LinkedIn. I post a lot there about presentation skills. Currently, I'm posting about the adult learning theory. And if you get in touch with me and let me know that you heard this podcast with Wayne, I'd be happy to send you an electronic version of the Principles of Engagement complimentary, and also a complimentary 45-minute coaching session, or just a chat. And we can talk about where you are currently at with your training, your presentations. If you got have any questions, I'd be more than happy to spend those 45 minutes with you. I'm not going to sell you, but if you want to take things to the next level, I'd be more than happy to talk about that.
Yeah, well, hopefully some of our listeners have really, aligned with the discussion, and all leaders, and that's predominantly our listener base, all leaders at some point in their career have to learn how to present, how to facilitate, and the better you do it, the more impact, the more influence you'll find you have as a leader. So I would highly recommend that anyone listening that has an interest to connect with David, obviously an expert in this field. So David Doerrier, I apologize for the German accent, or I'm not sure what the Doerrier, is that French, I guess?
I guess it gets pronounced a lot of times with a French, but it's I don't care. Dave, when I was in radio, it was Dave D. Make it very simple.
All right. Well, David D., thank you very much for being on the ET Project. It's been great conversation, and I really hope that some of our listeners connect with you.
Thank you, Wayne.
So what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so I can pop up in your feed occasionally with a great tip for your ultimate growth.